Good morning, everyone. It is 11 o'clock, so we will get started on time. I still think there's quite a few left to maybe join, but if not, that's okay. Yeah, I hope everyone's doing okay. I'm in sweater weather. It is that kind of chilly day. I have my two teenage boys are running their like the GBs is our area, so it's like the regional meet for cross country today, and I'm just hoping they stay dry and don't freeze. What else? Oh, and we had a very strong start to the day where my rather large Great Dane of a dog got sprayed by a skunk at 6:20 in the morning. So, if that's not going to wake you up, nothing will. All right. So I am seeing lots of familiar faces on today, which is so great. I love seeing everyone keep coming back and joining us, not just, because you're clients of ours, but because, we've been to other kind of webinars that we do. We are doing this one just because this question's come up for me quite a bit in the last probably 6 weeks. And it's going to be a bit different than some of the other webinars. It probably is going to be a little bit more technical. So one of two things are going to happen. We are either going to wrap up quicker than expected because I've either not done a great job of explaining this and everyone's got questions, but not enough information to ask them. Or we may go a little bit longer because I have done a good job and you guys have lots of questions. And yeah, if that's the case, if we are dealing with questions and you have to go, please know that, all of the questions we'll be trying to answer online. Jennifer McGillis, who is the co-owner of Pro Ergonomics, is on, and she is going to try and field the question and answer section or the chat box. So please feel free to put questions in there for maybe immediate answers. If by chance we miss something, we often have a tendency that if we haven't addressed it, we will send out kind of emails with the questions and the answers, so that, again, if we do end up going over a little bit on time and you've got to run to either another meeting or appointment, you're not necessarily missing out on questions that you may have yourself. So for as many of you that I recognize, and again, I'm glad to see you return, I see lots of new faces as well. And so welcome to our Pro Ergonomics webinar series. We do these kind of sporadically throughout the year. So, it's always a bit of a surprise, but maybe when we do them, we try maybe to do 6 a year. But if questions are coming up kind of organically within our day-to-day lives, like this topic here, then we may push an extra webinar out just to kind of help answer the question. So it is free, as you know, and its intent is really just to educate and elevate your ergonomics program, right? So many of you juggle so many different hats, and if we can just help smooth out the ergonomic process in any little way, then we feel like we are contributing and doing our job. So this is just our way of kind of giving back to all of you. So welcome. For those of you that do not know us, Pro Ergonomics is an ergonomics health and safety consulting firm. We specialize predominantly in ergonomics. However, again, there is such a big overlap that we do see, we do safety audits, we do job hazard analysis, all of those types of things as well. But we really pride ourselves on trying to work our clients into the arena of proactiveness, right? Trying to kind of stop the hamster wheel and kind of chasing our tails because we keep having to react to, let's face it, not ideal things that are happening in the workplace, and trying to scramble to get the answers we need, to get the accommodations we need to happen, to minimize our risk, so on and so forth. And ideally, we're going to do this in the most simple way possible to get you where you need to be. So sometimes we may have conversations, we get clients ask us, first off, sometimes they don't know what they need. They think they come in needing, a physical demands analysis. And once we kind of talk to you a little bit, we realize, no, you're actually looking for recommendations, which a PDA is not going to give you. So we can guide you to a service that's going to really solve more of your problems. And, same thing with your controls. We work kind of with our clients heavily to make sure that the controls are as practical and feasible as possible so that, you know, the change is minimal. It may be high amplitude, but we're not constantly changing things because we know historically our employees, they're actually not the ones asking for change for the most part. Even when they say they want change, they push back on change when we try to provide it. And so it's part of our job to kind of guide our clients to how they can just get to the biggest success, the fastest they can, in the best way they can. So today, as I said, this question has just come up with numerous people. Some of you may be here today. And I thought it's a really good question. And I'm really hoping I'm going to be able to clarify some of this a little bit. Because I find when it comes to manual handling, there's just some misconceptions. There's a lot of, numbers and theories out there that we kind of hear and think we're doing the right thing. We think the changes we make are in the right direction, and we could just be making things a lot easier, less change, and potentially even less cost and time, which in our books is all pros, pun intended. All right, so let's kind of get into this. The question is, how high can we go, right? That is the question we get most often, whether it be, you're in the hospital or the school board system and you are looking at patient handling and wondering, how much can we ask of our staff, or whether you're in operations or manufacturing and you're looking at either trying to maximize your logistics, right? We want to bring in as fewer trucks as possible, so we need to have them as full as possible, which means we need to have X amount of weight per box. So how high is that? And I'm going to disappoint everyone right here and now and say the answer is not straightforward. I think most of us know that by now, but I want to make it clear. It is not a straightforward answer. I do a ton of engineering training, and when I'm talking to engineers, I find there's a need, there's a want for a number, right? If I can give them a black and white number, like there's nothing they can't do with a black and white number. But I can't do that in almost every case. And so we have this challenge repeatedly over and over again. Now, what I'd like you to do, as I said, I try to give you guys a bit of a to-do list. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write in 3 areas in your workplace that you think you might not be meeting the manual material handling guidelines. Okay, so 3 areas or 3 tasks that you do in your facility that you are just like, yeah, I don't know about that. And ideally the questionable ones. I'm not talking about, someone tried to lift their car and we know that's going to be a problem. But what about the ones that are just kind of on the cusp that you're like, I don't know. I'm not sure, because I think that's where this session might help clarify those areas maybe a little bit more. So let's keep those in the forefront of our brain as we kind of move through the next kind of 50 minutes together. And maybe we can get some clarity as to what are your options? What are you supposed to do? How can we maybe use our manual material handling guidelines in a proactive way? So I'll give you a second just to scribble those 3 areas down. Okay. And if anyone would care to share them, we're always happy to see what other challenges everyone's kind of dealing with, because surprisingly, we find that a lot of us are actually suffering from the same growing pains. So And we have lots of like industries here today. So we have quite a few hospitals, we have quite a few school boards, we have quite a few manufacturers. So I think you would probably, again, be able to sync up a little bit. So what we're going to be doing today, first off, we're going to just briefly, maybe in a different way than what you're used to to talking about these, but we're going to recap our MSD hazards, right? I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but I want you to start thinking about some of these hazards, maybe in a just slightly different way. If you've been with us for a long time, you may have heard me speak to this in the same vein. So that will be repeat for you. But if not, it's a good refresher. Okay. Then we're going to start talking and maybe trying to reimagine that safe load concept. Because I'm pretty sure if I was to put out the question, what is like the safe weight limit out there, I think I'd see probably a bit of a trend on a specific number. And that may not be as accurate as you may think. So I'll clarify that. I'm going to talk about something called and it's totally me. I coined this, so don't go Googling it and expecting to try and find it somewhere. It is just my way of trying to explain it. As I say, I do a lot of engineering training, and so it's the way I've found that works well for my engineers, so I'm hoping it works well for you, and it's my pie concept. And I'll walk you through that because I think if you can understand the pie concept, then your ability to change work starts to look very different. And it looks less like opening a catalog and blindly picking an item to try and fix your problem, and becomes more about the process and the design. And so I want to spend a bit of time there, and hopefully I don't lose anyone on my pie concept, but I think it's an important background piece to understand. Then we're going to be looking at, well, how can we fix these maybe if we're trying to address them reactively? How can we use the tools that we have available proactively? And then what controls are going to make some of the biggest impact? All right, so let's jump in. So we have our three areas in the forefront of our brain. Let's jump into our main MSD hazard. So I don't think these are, blowing anyone's mind right now at this point. Force, repetition, awkward posture. Those are the main three hazards that we are going to be looking at when we're dealing with main material handling. Yes, there are other hazards. Yes, they may impact, but I will tell you right now that they are really not considered. So if you have vibration, yeah, that's not considered in any of the main material handling guidelines that we have. Even static holding, if you're having to hold it, we don't even have, basic level anyways, tools to really look at that. We would have to get into more biomechanical modeling, maybe more energy expenditure, and we are not going to be discussing those today. So these are the three components that we have that you may be seeing within your workplace that we're going to challenge you today to see if you can manipulate these in any way. So the first one I just want to talk about in a different way, because it is not a surprise that force is a problem, because that is why you're here, right? How high can we go? How high can our forces be before we incur injury? And so one of the things we need to kind of wrap around our mind around first, sorry, stumbling through my words, is most of you are highly, highly focused on the number that you have available to you, which is what we would call your external force, right? It is the weight of the human, the weight of the cart, the weight of the box, right? The weight of the tool, the weight of the product. It's the weight you know. Okay. You want to get extra techie? We're going to multiply that by gravity. Okay. So that is going to be everything that's happening from a force standpoint outside of the body. But then we have what we call the internal force, and that's the force that, as ergonomists, we're concerned about. We're not as concerned about what the external force is, but I am more interested to know what the internal force is, because almost always the internal force is going to be higher. Unless my posture and everything is just perfection, I'm going to have my muscles counterbalancing the external force. So that's really where the external force becomes important to us because we have a counterbalance happening inside the body. But we also have, physics at work. We have long levers that are adding force to the joint. And then we also have the segment weight. So whether that be an arm, whether that be a torso, right? I'm actually adding the weight to the body to those muscles as well. So depending on what the lift physically looks like from a posture standpoint, which we'll come to in a second, my internal force when going through the work process is almost always higher than the external force. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense to people. And what we need to realize is that it's the internal force that's causing injury, right? It's the fact that we are kind of overlapping force upon force upon force. We're taking that external force, we're overlapping that with long levers, we're overlapping that with body weight, or again, we're going to say segment weight. So, because it's not the whole body, it's just portions of the body. But when we put all of that on the muscular effort, that's when all the, the elastic band is going to snap. So just kind of tweak how we're looking about it. Again, I get it. The number you have in front of you is the external force, but just coming into terms with the fact that that force is only a very small portion. Well, maybe it's not a small portion, but it's only a portion of what you are having to deal with when it comes to reducing injury. All right. When we talk about repetition, this one is kind of your gym analogy, right? The more reps you do in the gym, the more muscular damage you're going to do. Now, in a gym setting, we have time to rest and we have time to recover. And so our muscular strength is going to increase. We don't have that in the workplace. So instead of recovery, we suffer from small, tiny percentages of muscular damage. We also then have increases of fatigue as our body is kind of struggling to repair itself. And when we're fatiguing, we may not be working in the best, most correct body postures we possibly can. Where you can focus on the repetition is looking at where are your employees performing unnecessary handling, right? See. In manufacturing, sometimes we'll see people, they'll pick up a box and then they'll bring it to a table. They'll do their labeling on the table and they'll pick the box up again and then they'll put it on a pallet. Well, why could we not do the labeling on the conveyor and only do the one lift to the pallet? Because now I've just increased my handling by 2. Same thing with a lot of our kind of human patient handling or student handling or those types of things is we have a tendency to do things in sections, right? We will perform this task once, and then we may almost repeat the task again, specifically in things like when we are doing washing or helping patients get changed or students get their clothes on, specifically if we're in an ECE kind of area where we kind of get the person to stand up, we get them to sit down, we get them to stand up, we get them to sit down. And that not only is stressful for your patient or your student, but it's also going to be stressful for your employee, right? So any unnecessary handling, we can identify huge opportunity to start bringing down or bringing up, I guess you could say, that load limit, that how high can we go? And then we have awkward postures. So the key thing I want to highlight here when we're talking about awkward postures is if we are dealing with lifting or manual material handling, but specifically in lifting, is we have two. We have 2 sets of postures we need to look at, right? Because there's a start of a lift and then there's the end of the lift. And very rarely does the start look identical to the end, not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's very, very rare, right? If I'm taking something off a shelf, my arms are above my hand. If I'm putting it on the ground, my back is bent, right? Two very different diagrams of what the human body looks like. So we need to assess both. It may be that both are problematic. It may be only one are problematic, or in the best case scenario, neither are. But we need to understand that we don't just look at one. There's two assessments happening when we assess lifts. We also need to take into consideration, and this is where I find some of my clients get a little bit lost, like they want to be proactive in what they're doing, but they get so wrapped up in the force component that we forget about the posture component. And as such, we don't take into consideration, what is the workstation making the body do? What are the tools making the body do? What is the equipment? Because if you're just looking at weight and kind of anthropometrics, and for those of you that are new here, anthropometrics are just measurements of the body. So our favorite one that we love to use the most would be elbow height. Elbow height keeps the back straight, the shoulders neutral, the wrists straight. It's kind of the kingpin of postures. It's what we always try to look and achieve. But if you are dealing with a product that's very large, you may put that at elbow height, which means all of your accessory things that you may be trying to lift and gather and use are now higher. And so it changes those body postures. So we need to make sure that we are aware, again, specifically if we're going to try moving into that proactive field, we need to have a full roster of data to be able to understand where we need to go to get that weight limit as high as possible. And that's probably why you're here, right? A higher weight means we can ask more of our human bodies, and by asking more in that regard, in a safe manner, we can potentially get more work done, which would be great. So we just need to make sure that we are working with all the data that we need. And so it's not just the weight. First off, we need the two starting points. We need a start and we need an end. And we need to consider all of the processes, the tools, the equipments that may just kind of throw a bit of a monkey wrench into what you're looking at. We also struggle a little bit, and I'm not going to touch on this a ton, but I'm also not going to ignore it. And that is for those of us that are dealing with variable heights. Maybe we are order pickers, maybe we are palletizers, but we are not always going from point A to point B. We may start at point A, but point B has B1, B2, B3, B4, B5 because our pallet has 5 layers in it. Or we are going through warehouse racking that has, 6 layers to it. So we can also have that component that comes in, which changes the repetition component. Okay. I can't say in good faith that you are going to always be going to point A to point B because point B changes. So that can be a little bit tricky as well. As I said, we're not going to navigate that today. We're just looking kind of at single lifts, but I understand that for some of you, that may be part of your challenge. And if it is, please reach out to us. We can potentially help you with that along the way. But for this, short, brief time that I have you, we're going to put a pin in that one. Okay, so the load concept, the number that people have. First off, we have 2 tools that I would say are readily available to you as, kind of layman practitioners of ergonomics. You don't maybe have a degree in it. Maybe some of you do, which is great. But these are kind of the 2 main areas that we find we go to first. They're relatively simple. They're relatively quick to assess, right? I don't have to create a whole biomechanical environment, which can take hours. This is something that, if you're used to using these tools, you should be able to get a number within, 5 to 10 minutes kind of thing, maybe half hour tops. All right, so first off, just to give some clarity here. So the difference I like to tell people about the Liberty Mutual tables, also known as the Snook tables or Snook and Cirillo tables for those of my ergos that are here, and the NIOSH lifting equation is that imagine there's a cliff, okay? If you walk to the very, very tippy edge of that cliff, you are going to be using the Liberty Mutual tables, okay? Because if you ask the question, what's the safe load limit that I can ask my employees to work with? And let's say it's 20 pounds, but you have a box weight of 21 pounds, we're at the edge of the cliff. Okay, there's no negotiating about that 1 pound. No more steps can be taken. You take a step, you're off the cliff. And so what we know with the Liberty Mutual tables is that first off, it takes you to the 75th percent female population, which because of, anthropometric tables or statistical, parabolic curves, they overlap. Our female tables overlap our male tables. And so this is why the ministry encourages us to design for our female population, because in designing for our female population, specifically when it comes to strength, we know that we're actually capturing about 90% of our male population, right? So we get that safety net is there. But the requirement is, our legislative requirement is to design for 75% of the female population. And so the number you're going to get from this Liberty Mutual tables is the last bit of weight that you could ask the 75th percentile female to load. If you take that extra step, if you say, it's just 1 pound, it's not going to make a difference, you are very wrong. You've now stepped off the cliff, you are falling, and we know, research has shown, that if we take that step off the cliff, we increase our chance of injury 3 times. Okay, so it's not a small amount. We jump 3 times the chance of back injury if we take that step. Now, to do a Liberty Mutual tables, there are 4 main data points you're going to need to know, right? We need to know what's the range of the lift, what's the distance that we're moving that object. We need to know kind of what quadrant of the body are we talking, or I shouldn't say quadrant, third, because we talk in terms of, shoulder height, kind of that power, core, central middle zone, and that floor level. We need to know what the horizontal reach is. So both of those are going to start painting out the picture of what your posture is going to look like. We then need to know our frequency. And then, as I said, we need to know how much distance are you carrying or moving that object. Now, with NIOSH, right, the scene looks, so with Snook, you're standing back here on this cliff, back in the background. With NIOSH, you're standing here. Okay, so they've put up a safety railing for you. It is a more conservative tool. I've had conversations with the Ministry of Labor that says they sometimes can't use the NIOSH equations because they can't write orders knowing that the tool is so conservative. They need, if they're going to write an order, they need to know that injury is imminent. So that's kind of an interesting concept. But it is still, if you're trying to really safeguard, NIOSH gives you that. So, because it goes to 90% of the population. So it's giving you that, 15% more, or you could argue less weight to make 15% more of the population able to handle it. So it is more conservative. We do need more data points. So we need to know, how high is your lift? Is there reach? So very similar to our Snook. What distance are you lifting it? Also, Liberty Mutual tables is asking the same question. We're asking again the frequency, same. The only 2 elements that NIOSH asks that Liberty Mutual doesn't is there twisting? And can you get a good grip? So if you're not lifting off, let's say, a rack or a conveyor and loading it to a table or another, right? Where we don't have twisting, the body postures, we're really just dealing with those 4 data points, then it makes sense that we would use Liberty Mutual tables, right? But if we know that twisting is a problem, if we know that getting a good grip on objects is a concern for our employees, then that may also sway which tool you would use, because you are adding 2 extra elements with the NIOSH equation than you are with the Liberty Mutual. All right, so that's kind of our background on our Liberty Mutual and NIOSH. Those are the 2 main material handling tools that we use to kind of give an initial assessment on whether or not your handling task is going to be problematic. Now, oops, we're gonna come back to that one. So, when we start talking about a weight, I said, if I was to ask you, what is the safe load weight? I am guessing some of you maybe would have likely thrown out that 51 pounds or 23 kilograms. It is a number that 50 pounds gets bandied about quite regularly in the ergo space, and it's a bit misleading, right? For those of you, and I know some of you I have here, are governed by federal legislation, not just provincial. And they actually have. So our provincial legislation does not give us any weights in any way, shape, or form, right? We just say, is there a hazard? We need to minimize it, do risk assessments, so on and so forth. But in the federal, when you get into the material handling legislation, that 51 pounds, that gets brought up, right? 50 pounds gets talked about. And now, don't be too alarmed. It's not saying anything mind-blowing. Really, all it is saying is if you have 50 pounds, well, then you need to be training people on how to handle 50 pounds, right? You may need to be doing 2-person lifts. You may need to be doing other things, but training is the main push if you know you have weights over 50 pounds. Now, so both of these tools, Liberty Mutual and NIOSH, use this 51 pounds as what we call a load constant. And so what that means is that if you have a perfect lift, that object is nice and small and it's against the body and it's at elbow height and you only lift it once a day, the female population can lift that safely once in 8 hours. That's where that 51 is coming from. So that is our load constant. So they're saying the best case scenario in a shift, an 8-hour shift, is a 50-pound load handled perfectly. So you can understand now why that 50 pounds really means very, very little in the ergonomics world. Because how often do you have that happening? A one-time 50-pound lift with perfect posture, right? It's just not that regular. So that would be like us sitting down and eating the whole pie. We're never eating the whole pie. We always cut the pie into pieces. And so when we cut the pie into pieces, each of those pieces is one of those data points that I was talking to you about. So whether it be the reach, whether it be, how high off the ground are we lifting it? How far are we lifting it? Like, what's the travel distance? Do we have any twisting? How frequently are we doing it? Is it hard to handle? And so what we are trying to do as health and safety leaders is we are trying to either remove a piece of the pie or shrink the pie entirely. So we can shrink these pieces so that, sorry, I'm lying to you. Scrap that. We are trying not to remove pieces. We're trying not to. We want these pieces to be as whole as possible to get as much weight. When we have parts of our lift that are not good, that is when we shrink the pie or we take out a piece of the pie. So now all of a sudden, my 51 pounds, let's say I have twisting. So what could once be handled once in a day was 50 pounds. If there's twisting in it, nope, not anymore. Now we're down to 44.6, and that's just an arbitrary number, right? So you can kind of see how we can start to manipulate our data points to make sure that we are getting the most. But that is where that 51 pounds comes from. So when we ask how high we can go, a lot of people come to us and say, like, we have lifts of 50 pounds. We're assuming that that's good because, you know, that's the safe lifting load limit. And we're like, no, it's not. It's not at all. And in fact, we can't give you one number. We can't give you that one black and white number because as the person moves around and does variable tasks, that number is going to change for each of those tasks. And the reason why is all of these multipliers. Now, let's go back to that previous slide. So, oh, people still joining. Okay, so for instance, in the NIOSH equation, as I said, it's going to ask for all of this data. What's the reach? What's the vertical placement? How far is the load being moved? The frequency, the twisting, and the coupling or the grasp. The grasp is what the coupling is. So here's just a few. Okay, so here's our horizontal, which is our reach. We have our vertical, which is, you know, where is it off the ground to start with? The distance is moving, like are we moving at 2 inches as more of a transfer, or are we going from, you know, above shoulder all the way down to a pallet? And then lastly, we have that asymmetry or twisting. So what we do when we are entering these numbers into the NIOSH calculator is you're going to say, I have 10 inches of reach. 10 inches is ideal. You can see that when you have 10 inches of reach, you are going to have a score of 1, which means you get to keep the whole pie. The whole piece of that reach pie is going to stay just as big as it was when you started. So anytime you have a 1, these are going to be the ideal zones we want to be working because we are giving our employees the most weight safely. When we don't have those, you can see the multiplier starts to shrink that number. And if we're looking at, you know, reaches of around 25, we could be reducing that 50 pounds with just one multiplier by 60%. Right? So when you look at these, I just want you to be aware, the thing that I think shocks people is a lot of people get very focused on, you know, that above the shoulder or below knee lifting, and I get it. It looks bad. It's where you're seeing the awkward posture come into the most. And yes, it's not shrinking that piece of the pie. It's not cutting out a big portion, but you can see it reduces the load. At its worst case scenario, it's going to reduce the load by 30%. The distance, if it's going a long way, if we're moving it a long distance, the most it's going to reduce the load is 15%. If there's twisting, it's 42% at its worst, which would be 135 degrees of twist. And here we have 60. Reach, 60. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The first thing all of you should be looking at when you're trying to get your safe load limit as high as possible is eliminating any reach whatsoever, because it's the thing that's going to pull down your weight the most. Okay, so that's why I'm really showing you this. I'm not trying to confuse you with multipliers and math that you are not ready to do on a Thursday morning, but I do want you just to be aware on that our multipliers are not created equal. So although here I have a pie with all the pieces looking relatively the same size, they're not. Our horizontal multiplier is a really bigger piece of the pie. And you can see our twisting would be next in line as far as making the biggest impact. So getting rid of twisting, keeping the load closer to the body, those are going to be two of the biggest things you can do if you have twisting anyways, to make that lift or manual material handler safer. All right, have I lost anyone yet? Hopefully everyone's in line with me. Okay, so our goal is to try and keep our multipliers looking somewhere along these lines. So you can see Ideally, our vertical height is around 30 inches. We want to be moving it 10 inches at most to give us that biggest number out of the pie. We don't want twisting, and we want a horizontal reach, basically the distance of our forearm, right? 10 inches roughly is our forearm length, give or take. And so that's going to give the best load closest to the body. That's going to give you your best bang for your buck. So as your tasks change, these numbers are going to change, and therefore your load constant is going to change, or your recommended weight limit is going to change. So the next thing that we get a lot of the time that I want to talk about, if we're talking about trying to get the load as high as we can, is, okay, we're exceeding guidelines. We believe that the safe load limit is 51 pounds. Our load is 100 pounds. Well, that's okay. We'll just get 2 people to do it. So we'll be safe. We actually have 2 pounds to spare. No, you do not. That is incorrect. When we look at safe working limits for 2 people, that is not a 50-50. There is, not to say that it's going to be the case, but you would have to have 2 people exactly the same height, first off. Because any difference in height is going to cause a shift in that fulcrum weight. We need to have them moving completely in sync, which would be highly rare. Even for like our paramedics teams that have worked together for years still and are doing all the proper, work method, call outs, we still will not see perfect synchronization. And so we need to expect that at any point in time, someone could be handling up to 2/3 of the weight. So when we take 2/3 of 100 pounds, we are actually at 67 pounds. Well, that's not 51. We've already said 51 is actually a number we need to stop thinking about because it's rarely going to be the case. But even in this case, a 2-person lift on a 100-pound load is not going to bring you within guidelines because we actually need to assess that based on the fact that there's not equal loading and that in any given time, one person could be supporting the weight up to 67% of the weight. So our safe limit isn't 50 here. We're saying our actual weight is 67, which means that 51 pounds that we think is our recommended weight limit in the perfect lift doesn't fit. It's not going to be within guidelines. So we always need to make sure, first off, that we do a single person assessment, right? We're going to either run our NIOSH, we're going to either run our snook, and we're going to figure out what that threshold value is, what that recommended weight limit is or maximal weight limit is. And we are going to then take that 67% of our load and see if we are above or below guidelines for the assessed, the correct safe working limit. All right. Okay. So what I would like to also point out, so these are kind of some abridged versions of the Liberty Mutual tables, right? So you can see here, my goal is not to teach you how to use the Liberty Mutual tables, but in the 15 minutes I have, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of how these are laid out. So you can see along the top here, this is my reach data. These columns here are talking about how far the load is being lifted, and that vertical distance, where is my starting point? Are we looking at above shoulder? Are we taking it off the top of a rack? Are we loading it to the floor, or are we working at elbow height? So I have 2 different tables that I would use. So those are the data points that I was saying you are going to need. So let's say we have a box that is being lifted off a rack, right? Whether it be an inventory storeroom, well, let's say it's an inventory storeroom. Most of us will have those, no matter what industry we're in. And our box is 21 pounds. Also, not a weight that is completely unheard of. Now, I've kind of given a bit of but it doesn't matter. I can move it over here. Let's say it's happening once every, we could say 20, I've picked this one. Okay, so it's happening once every 5 minutes. Maybe we're doing restock, and the distance is to the back of this. We're pushing it to the back of the rack. And so we have a reach distance of 15, meaning we are at 20. So again, that 1 pound does make a difference. It exceeds our maximum acceptable limit. And so therefore we are not within guidelines. And so this is where a lot of people will be like, okay, well, what can I do? It's a great question. It is the question, actually. And when you look at these tables, the answer to that question becomes a little bit easier to understand. So first off, I could reduce the frequency, right? If I go up in this graph to once an hour or once every half hour, then I can be, and if I shorten the distance it's moved, I could be within guidelines. However, where I'm getting the most acceptable, well, I could even bring it down here, is by shortening that reach. So maybe the answer is I need to reduce the depth of my racking, right? So a lot of times we see people throw stuff at the problem. Oh, well, we got a cart. Oh, well, we got a lift assist. Oh, well, we got, these straps to handle things, or we put two people on the job so that it can be safe. When you could have got to the end result just by maybe putting a blockade at the back of your rack so they're not pushing to that 15 inches, right? Or getting narrower racks. So, or a gravity fed rack that would always keep it to the front, right? All of these things could have come in, but the answer to this question, at least at this height, would be to drop the reach. Now, if we're able to drop the height, because again, that would be a good administrative thing. Okay, we're just not going to load the top rack with anything that's 20 pounds. Well, now all of a sudden, I have so much more. Please note, this is always very interesting to a lot of my clients, is that we actually have more weight capacity that we can lift at that floor to knuckle. From a postural assessment, because there is more opportunity for poor work method, we take some of these numbers with a grain of salt. But if people are able to keep their back straight, working from floor to knuckle, we actually can get a higher weight limit. And the reason being is I can push through the legs, right? That's why that data is skewing so much more blue than, let's say, even our elbow height, which I said is, the bee's knees. But you can see here, now all of a sudden, I can actually do more. I could not change it at all if I just don't have that over 54 inches. Or I could also reduce the weight. So that's just kind of a quick glance to make you understand how important looking at the risk assessment data is and understanding those multipliers, right? Understanding how these measurements that you are taking really impact where your safe work limit is. And all of these things are talking about bringing things up, moving things closer, getting rid of maybe huge distances that we're moving, because, and that doesn't cost, in most cases, a ton of money, right? We're not asking you to put robots in. So kind of something to be considered. Now, as I said, when we're talking about this floor to knuckle concept and we're seeing these big numbers, and I'm sure our eyes are getting big and we're getting all excited, and like, so you can see that's where I have my 51 pounds. You see it right there, close to the body, with knees bent, using all the muscles I have available to me and pushing through with a straight back. I need to make that caveat, with a straight back, I can lift 51 pounds, and that's that load constant we see. NIOSH uses the same load constant. So if we're going to get that straight back, we need to train on it. And we don't just train when they start. We need to train regularly. Oh, my dog just got on furniture. Sorry, but now my furniture is going to smell. I did bathe him, but I don't know if any of you have pets that have been skunked, but it lingers. Sorry, I digress. So we need this to be regularly. Jen and I teach this on not quite a daily basis, but definitely a monthly basis. And I will tell you that every time I go through manual material handling training, the week after, I am on point. And then after that week, it starts to go down, right? And it's my job. So imagine what's happening to your employees, right? They're trying to get a lot done in a short period of time. They've got a lot of different things being thrown at them, a lot of distractions. We need muscle memory. The number one thing that Jen and I get when we do, well, not just Jen and I, all our employees get when we do manual material handling training and we're teaching people how to lift properly, they say, oh my goodness, this feels so awkward. And it always kind of brings a bit of a grin to our face because all that tells us is that you have no muscle memory to this method, right? It means you're not doing it. If you did it all the time, it would not feel awkward because there would be muscle memory there. So in your training, we want to do it regularly. So depending on how much lifting you do, depends on how more frequently I would do it. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a full-blown, hour and a half session like we would do. It could just be your lead hands, your supervisors reminding people on a more regular basis than they are. Definitely great administrative control that you could tackle. Your training needs to be more than a milk crate box talking about bent knees and straight backs. We learn this concept when we are like in public school. It's not that we don't know it. It's that in most cases, it's challenging to employ because we're not lifting milk crates. We're lifting people. We're lifting big bags of salt. We're lifting bulky, I don't know, fire hydrants. Like we don't have these nice milk crate type things always being available to us. So now what am I supposed to do? So we need methods for performing some of those lifts. We need methods of performing proper lifting when we have sore body parts. Again, when we start talking about bent knees, half of my room will be like, nah, can't do it. My knees are shot. Well, what's their alternative? We need to provide that for them. And there is alternatives. So we also want to ideally use an environment that's going to mimic how they're going to be working. Let them workshop their issues out. We have had the most success doing frontline training literally on the front lines. Jen works a lot with municipalities and school boards, and she is in ditches getting people to haul things out in the correct way. I am in hospitals, in rooms, getting people on manufacturing floors. The environment makes a big difference to how well your training is going to be received. If you are asking people to do two-person lifts, you need to train on what that looks like. But you also need to, if you have engineering controls, please teach them how to use them. I have lift assists, carts, all kinds of wonderful ergonomic controls available to employees, and they are collecting dust. As I said, for those of you that were with us last week, one of the things that we found in our hospital settings, so much handling equipment, and it had got moved and shuffled, and someone didn't know what to do with it, and it was literally in the furthest, most convenient place in the back of a storage room behind so much big, heavy equipment that it was problematic. When we say try to push things versus lifting them, so just to kind of give you same kind of tables, but these are the lifting table up here versus the pushing table down here. So here, once a day, my lift close to the body, right? And a very short distance of 10 inches, I can get 40 pounds. But look how frequently I can handle 40 pounds. And we all know your push force is never going to be. So I can push 40 pounds of force. But for me to push 40 pounds of force would likely be about 8 40-pound boxes, right? I can literally push hundreds of pounds with relatively low force, within perspective there. But you can see here, like we start to see our numbers become way more user friendly. Ideally, you still see that sustained. So sustained would be if you had to continue pushing and it wasn't just the start push. If that was 42 pounds, we haven't really changed our risk too much. But I'm going to say that's rare. I don't know what Jen would say, but it's very rare that, in fact, I'm not sure I've ever had a sustained push that's been 42 pounds, even when we are moving humans. So we always want to push versus lift or carry. So that's going to be where we maybe can start thinking outside of the box. It's not always a pump truck. Okay. It could be slides, it could be conveyors, it could be carts, it could be dollies, pallet lifters. So just kind of thinking, well, how else, or just sliding it. Maybe just the floor needs to be a little slippery or not have carpet if you're in an office setting. But we always know pushing is going to be easier on the body than lifting. Okay. So that's where we kind of have all of these tools and great things available to us to help when we can't lower the load and we can't adjust how people are handling it. There are other options. We are not like sitting there throwing our hands up going, oh, we tried, but the load's this, the task is this, there's nothing else we can do in between. There is lots we can do in between. Where I am pushing you for those 3 areas that you were looking at is before you go here, try to see if the parameters of the lift can be changed. Try to see if we can address some of these pieces of the pie so that they are going to be as big as possible, right? So hopefully I haven't confused anyone. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to assume that's probably maybe a bad thing. But I really hope if you have questions, reach out to us. We love talking anything ergonomics, and if we could, make this a little bit more digestible. Hi, Naya. Did you have a question? Okay, shoot. But yeah, we would love to help in any way you can. And as I said, whether we're challenging you to reassess, and just this week alone, I've had 2 conversations of people looking to reassess their training. So, because it's not hitting the mark. And most of our put in, you know, your video, your online video that you're pressing play to are probably not capturing the elements of your task that you're needing to highlight. So manual handling training is, as much as we want it to be a nice canned package that we can just press play on for that onboarding purposes. Now, if you have a question, I'm hoping you're putting it in the chat so we can answer it. Oh, there it is. Okay. But yeah, it's usually always much better if you're working within the environment and the tasks that you have at hand. So Naya's asking, what if someone is dragging a skid? They are damaging their back. Kindly share how and to what extent. So again, that black and white number you're looking for, I would have to run that assessment. It depends on where are their hands when they're dragging it? How far are they dragging it? How frequently are they dragging it? So and what is the actual weight to drag it? Because if you're telling me there's 1,200 pounds on that skid, they're not dragging 1,200 pounds. That is physically impossible, right? So what is the weight? So we would actually need to take a force gauge and figure out that, oh, it's just an empty skid. So again, we would still need to take that force measurement. What kind of skid is it? Is it a hardwood skid? Hardwood skids run around 96 pounds. A plastic skid is about 36 pounds. Soft wood is around 50. So again, it's not the weight of the skid. It's not that external weight. I need to know the force. But I'm not able to just give people a number. We get that question so often. Would need to do the manual material and handling assessment to determine what your safe limit is. Hi, Julie. I like this information. I can help us. Countries are needed safe. Okay, so I think Julie, and if correct me if I'm wrong, she's asking, can I use um, these manual material handling assessment tools in a job match situation where you actually have an injured worker? Unfortunately, no. So when we are looking at restrictions for our employees, our restrictions become our new safe working limit. So it doesn't, all of that we have with whether it's NIOSH and our 90%, whether it's Snook at our 75%, both of them are under the assumption that these humans are able-bodied, very muscularly healthy, healthy in all regard kind of thing. And so we are not, oh, that's not what I mean. Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. You can use the table to verify that you're like, it's the balance and checks, right? If you know your work limit, you don't have anything below your maximum or recommended weight limit, that goes a long way to safeguarding the employees. And so, although it's not typically information that you would pass along in a return to work situation, it is information that your Ministry of Labor would be interested in. And so, using those tables to verify that you are not putting your employees at risk is really what we're doing. If the employee is already injured, whether from the workplace or outside of the workplace, then we switch gears and we use the restrictive data that we are giving by the medical practitioner. Yes, all of this, Julie. So Julie's just saying this is her due diligence. Absolutely. This is your due diligence. This is building the case that you are a safe place to work and you are doing everything you can to make this, you know, as safe as possible. Because it also will help. And for those of you that need to go, I completely understand it's 12:01. This recording will be on. So for those of you that need to leave, you can. If those of you that are wanting to stay and have a conversation, I'm willing, more than able to be here for you. But this will get uploaded on our YouTube channel. So this goes a long way. In fact, when we have LOE inspectors come in, we will often have them, Ministry of Labor, they will often, one of the orders that they will write is you need to perform a risk assessment. And that's what this is. Ideally, sorry, if I actually go to the end of my slides, because I have one more slide. Ideally, you are running these before we're actually putting work in place. Now, for most of us, that's waved bye-bye, right? But there may be new processes, new equipment, new things that we're enforcing. So, I mean, I had a client where they actually put in a lift assist, and if they'd run a risk assessment on the boom arm that they'd put in, they would actually have realized that they made the situation worse, not better, because it was so poorly designed. We did not have anything to do with that design. I would just like to footnote that. But when we went in, they thought they had already done a proactive thing. And the assessment showed that the manual effort to move this boom arm exceeded where they were before. Are there any assessment tools that take age into account? Ooh, great question, Ted. No. Now, that being said, age was screened for. There is, in the studies that developed these assessment tools, they did not just pick 20-year-olds. They had a working demographic, that they were working with. So, however, we do know that, as we age, the muscular capacity does decline on average, unless we are doing great things to keep ourselves in top physical form. But we also find that there is, and this isn't obviously able to be documented in any strong way, but typically I find, and the only thing that really does support that is our WSIB statistics. It is not our 60-year-olds getting hurt, right? It's our 35 to 45-year-olds that are getting hurt. Is the people that were 20 have now got to their 30s and 40s, had 10 years of kind of that aging decline that we all suffer from, are not aware of it, have not changed anything that they've been doing, except for maybe doing less because at 20 we maybe don't have kids, so we're doing more things for ourselves, we're playing the sports, we're going to the gym, we're not, eating up all our time and all the things that we often sometimes get once we get older. Our time becomes our premium. And so some of those things that kept us in the great shape also have been sacrificed in those 10 years. And it's that demographic. Our 60-year-olds have got to the point where they often work smarter, not harder. Now, again, I don't necessarily have literature to support that, but other than the WSIB statistics, which year after year, it is never the 55 to 65-year-olds. It is always the 30 to 45. So no, we don't, is the short answer, but they were taken with I guess, like poly demographic where we have lots of age groups being represented in those studies. All right. Well, if you guys think of questions after the fact, please email us. You can the easiest way is at info@proergonomics.ca. Many of you, I think, have my email address. It's astinson@proergonomics.ca. But yeah, we would love to help navigate this in any way. As I said, it's just something that's been coming up where people are really wanting to know on a proactive level. They're like, okay, we get it. Weight's a problem, but what can we do? And again, anyone who was in the last month's session, that was exactly what one of our clients did is they had a ton of manual material handling. And they wanted for each station that they had, we assessed and we made a blanket policy on how heavy their product totes could be so that they were never going to be exceeding that guideline. And it was received by the employees like they felt a difference. Also to consider drivers that have been in trucks for hours and then go to lifting things. Yes. Drivers are kind of a whole different, what is the kettle of fish? Is that the saying? I should just stop using sayings because I never get them right. Because they have those overstretched muscles. Most of the data that we have are working individuals. And when I say work, I mean like they're already mobile, their muscles are in stages of movement in and out. So there's stretch, there's constriction, there's stretch, there's contraction. And with our long haul drivers or, anyone who's sitting for greater than 20 minutes, 20 minutes is kind of that threshold, whether you're in your office, whether you're in a car, but that's when the muscles start to kind of forget how to get back to where they need to be. And so jumping out of your car and in to do some heavy lifting is going to be, well, you don't even need to be heavy lifting. My scenario, I went a lot of years without having any back issues whatsoever. I'm very physically active. And we drove from Montreal, which is about 6 hours away, home. And I got out of the car and I bent down to pick up a piece of cardboard, and that did my back in. So now that was 6 hours. So keep that in mind. But it's a great point, Julie, is that these assessments can't be used like unilaterally across every task. They are definitely, static work is not being assessed here. All right. Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. As I said, I hope I didn't make things harder for you. I hope that this kind of just reassessed and redefined maybe different ways of looking at your manual material handling, trying to put to sleep that 51 pounds. It is never really ever going to be a number that we ever put in a risk assessment that we do because that lift almost never exists at that frequency. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it never happens only once a day. So yeah, it is a number that we use, but we hear a lot about, but it's really not as functional as we hope. 51 pounds is too much weight. Thanks, Julie. All right, guys. I'm not sure if we have a webinar next month or not. It may be a surprise. as I said, this one was a bit of a surprise, so we may shuffle things. We do not have webinars in December. Everyone is just too hard to nail down in September. We're all getting geared up for the holidays. And so we will probably, if at the very least, we will see you again in January. So have a great rest of your week. Hopefully, no skunks are in your daily future or future in general. And good luck. Any questions, please reach out.